Year 10 and 11, welcome to your AQA English Language Revision. We are focusing on paper 1, section B, which is the writing question, and that is question 5. If you look obviously on this screen here, what I've done is I've put both papers up, even though this video will focus on paper 1, section B. But as you can see, both of paper 1 and paper 2 in English language have a writing element, which is section B. On paper 1, it's descriptive or narrative writing. On paper 2, it is writing to present a viewpoint. Again, if you look on the screen, you can see that the writing on both papers is worth 40 marks, which is quite a lot. And that is 25% of the GCSE grade on both papers. It also breaks it down for you there that you are given 24 marks for your content and 16 marks for your technical accuracy. Therefore, it goes without saying that spelling, punctuation and grammar must be used correctly at all times, really. And we have to check our work very, very carefully. Remember, this is the writing part. This is when you are judged on everything you write, okay? Your assessment objectives are outlined as follows. AO5 is communicate clearly, effectively and imaginatively, selecting and adapting tone, style and register for different forms, purposes and audiences. The second bullet point there is organise information and ideas using structural and grammatical features to support coherence and cohesion of texts. And then AO6 is use a range of vocabulary and sentence structures for clarity, purpose and effect with accurate spelling and punctuation. There's quite a lot of information there. So if we look very carefully, they are asking us to communicate clearly. So it needs to make sense. Imaginatively, we've got to try and be ambitious if we can. Different form means that you've read the question and understood what type of writing is expected, i.e. descriptive writing, narrative writing. The organisation of information is structural features there, so we need to think about how we structure our answer. That means how we paragraph, when we paragraph, for maximum impact to influence the reader. Structure can also be the structure of our sentences, and cleverly the use of punctuation. So for instance, the use of the colon or the use of the semicolon can be used for structural reasons. And the bottom one there, again, your vocabulary, a range of vocabulary. So you should have been reading all of the time in preparation for this exam. We need to think about what words we use and whether or not they are ambitious and mature. We don't really want to sound childish and immature here. Again, thinking about sentence structure, and where possible, our spelling obviously needs to be accurate. So for instance, the paper might look like this. You are given a sentence or two sentences at the top. You are going to enter a creative writing competition. Your entry will be judged by a panel of people of your own age. So straight away we have got the type of writing we are doing, the form, creative writing. We have also been given the audience, so it's people our age, people your age. Now, our choice is, remember it is a choice, we answer one, not both. Write a description suggested by the picture. You've got your picture. Or write the opening part of a story about a place that has been destroyed. And that is the narrative. And underneath we are again given the breakdown of the marks, 24 marks for content and organisation, 16 marks for technical accuracy. So it's 40 marks in total. So that there is just an example of what the paper might look like. So we know we're probably going to get a picture, and we know we might be asked to write a narrative. Naturally, you would need to choose the question that best suits you, that is going to show off your talents. We know that descriptive writing should really engage the five senses: sight, sound, touch, etc., etc. So that goes out saying you've probably been doing descriptive writing since year 7, in fact since primary school, and a lot of people enjoy it. So what we're going to do now in the video is just run through some key things that we should be thinking about if we are doing descriptive writing. If we are doing the first question, which is the question based on the picture. In preparation for the information that is about to be given to you about vocabulary and similes and metaphors and structure and things like that, this is the image I want us to focus on, the image I want us to have in our mind. So as we can see, we've got a road, we've got land on either side that's quite barren and bare, nothing much happening, and we've got a storm and a tornado brewing, and there's also lightning striking as well, and grey dark clouds. We're going to start with just a quick mention on vocabulary before we move on. So this is the image that you need to keep referring to for the next few minutes. Okay, so remember that image. So we know that vocabulary is one of the things we need to focus on. It has been mentioned in the assessment objectives. So it's quite a good idea that when you're practicing any descriptive writing, that you start with a word bank. So words you know you can use. So words that the image brings to your mind. Now, what I've done first off here is, I've given you words that I think will be quite common here. I think a lot of students are probably going to say that it's scary. The reason scary's in red there is because, not that I'm saying we shouldn't use this word. What I'm saying is it's one of those words that can appear quite childish because children will use that word quite a lot. So what we want to try and do, if possible, is maybe sub it in. Now, frightening, petrifying, terrifying, again, are words that are quite commonly used. So frightening, petrifying, terrifying, I don't think are really that ambitious in terms of vocab. So on the bottom there, I've added menacing and alarming. What you might do as you're watching this video is try and write some sentences using perhaps menacing and alarming. Again, if you're someone where English isn't a strength to you, then okay, use frightening and petrifying and terrifying as a safety blanket maybe. But if you can use better vocab, I would try. Now, there's better words still that we can use. So on the next slide, I'm just going to bring up some more mature words that we might look at. So if we have been reading and we're well read, we might then really go for it in terms of ambitious and creative vocabulary and use perhaps the following words. You've got daunting, intimidating, unnerving, formidable, overwhelming. Again, those words, they are better choices of vocabulary because they won't be used so often. Remember, you need to get your descriptive writing to stand out when the examiner reads it. You really want them to remember it, and clever choice of wording and vocabulary can help with that. You know, imagine if someone's opening sentence said the tornado was scary. Now again, imagine they used daunting instead. The tornado which approached was daunting. Whilst there's not a great difference in those two sentences, it's vocabulary choices. Again, why don't you pause the video and try to put those words into sentences that describe the image? And all of a sudden what's happening is you are writing an answer without realising it. So vocabulary banks are a good way to get yourself started. Naturally, we're going to have to check our spelling very carefully because spelling, punctuation and grammar is something that is very key now. And just for additional vocabulary associated with this picture, I'll give you some more words on the next slide, and then we're going to move to similes. So we already started our vocabulary bank on the last slide with daunting, intimidating, unnerving, formidable and overwhelming. And again, this is just a list of other words that I think the picture reminds you of, which you've got disaster, consequences of it, something that's unfortunate, accidental, natural, and catastrophe. Again, if you're really trying to practice your revision here and your spelling and your vocab, why don't you pause the video and try to put those words into sentences as well? And that will give you quite a few different sentences with some decent vocabulary, some mature vocabulary that can then be transferred into an answer. Okay, let's move to figurative language now, and we'll start with simile. Just for revision purposes, although I do expect everyone to know what simile is, a simile is a figure of speech in which two things are compared using like or as. She is like a rose. Nothing difficult there. We need to know it when we are doing the reading section, in case we need to pick it out and analyse it. And we also need to, if we can, use it ourselves. Now, the problem with similes is that people or students tend to use cliches. Now, when I say cliche here, I've put it on the slide, it is something that is overused. It is probably a saying that you hear quite often, or a phrase, and therefore it is overused. Now, obviously, if you're going to use a cliche in your writing, then it won't be as original and creative, because you are using something that is already overused. So we have to try and be original and creative in our use of similes. So what I've done, just as a quick test, is I have written the start of some similes for you that you might want to complete as part of your revision. Again, as you go, try to avoid a cliche. So this is the first one. So the first simile you might want to attempt to complete. His temper was dauntless like. And then there's your vocabulary in red there to tell you what dauntless means. It means determined, confident and fearless. So we can do vocabulary as we go as well. So what might we add there? Remember, we are avoiding cliche. So for temper, we're thinking about something quite volatile. So if you were thinking of putting something like a volcano erupting here, I would argue that that is a cliche. Okay, so we've got to think quite carefully here about something that is determined and fearless and add that into the simile. Your next one is nature reigned over the horizon like. Again, there's your vocabulary for reigned. It is something that means ruled, governed or controlled. Look at the spelling on that one. Now, again, if we're talking about someone reigning over something, using king or queen here is going to be a cliche. So think again about what we could say reigns over the horizon. Nature reigned over the horizon like. Think carefully. Your next one is the vessel waited calmly on the ocean like. I haven't put any vocabulary on this one because it's not necessary. We know what all those words mean. So think about a simile here, something that's calm. The vessel waited calmly on the ocean like. What could we write? The next one is gracefully the sun reflected off the mountain like. Again, no vocabulary necessary there because it's straightforward. Now look, gracefully the sun reflected off the mountain like. Now the word reflected means if we bring up anything like a mirror or the comparison of a mirror is going to be a cliche. Okay, so think carefully about where we might see something reflected other than the mirror. Gracefully the sun reflected off the mountain like. Okay. So that was just to kind of get us thinking about how we can be creative with our similes. I'm just going to remind you of the image that we're thinking about here. So, if you use your vocabulary bank that we've already had with words like daunting and overwhelming and consequences, disaster, all the words I gave you a couple of minutes ago, and now we try and add 3 similes to that, as I say, our writing will start to take some sort of shape. We'll have some sentences that we know we can use. So obviously there's a lot more to be said, but we will have some sentences that we can use in our work. Now, what I'm going to do next is something slightly different in terms of the writing paper, and it's before we get to metaphor. Based on that image, we're going to do something just for revision practices. You don't have to actually do it if you don't want to, but you can just listen and kind of plan it in your head. Now we're going to look at something called slow writing, and I shall show you what that is. After I've done slow writing, I'll be doing metaphor, so please hang around to watch the video in terms of looking at metaphor and personification as well. The video is going to be long, so do pause it. Now, slow writing is something where you go step by step. Now, the wonderful thing about slow writing is as you go, you are forced to consciously consider the structure of your writing. And structure is a big deal because a lot of students have been taught to change paragraph when they're changing topic, or when they're changing speaker, or when they're changing time. Now, in descriptive creative writing, we have to be a lot more manipulative with structure. So slow writing allows us to consciously consider what we're going to write, when we're going to write it, and where we're going to place it. So it's just something step by step, just to kind of help you consider structure. So this is step one. Remember the image on the screen that we're thinking about. So the first sentence is a one-word sentence to capture the scene. Now, remember the picture, which is the tornado. What one-word sentence could we use to sum up the entire scene? I've put some suggestions on the board there if struggling. Ominous is a good one, thinking about vocabulary. So it's quite an ominous scene, isn't it, seeing the tornado in the road. So, as I say, if you're going to practice this as you go, why not try and write it down on a piece of paper? If not, just think about structure. So we're going to start with a one-word sentence. We're going to move to step 2 now. After our one-word sentence, step 2 then is a creative, original simile, describing what we can hear. So there's one of our 5 sentences. We are not going to use the cliche. The thunder echoed in the sky like. If you can't think of your own, use that. So we have our one-word sentence, something like ominous, and then we've got a simile. The thunder echoed in the sky like. Again, please try to avoid cliche. I'm going to bring up my answer and my example in a couple of steps' time. Right, step 3 then is as follows. Your next sentence must describe how that noise from the simile makes you feel. So dead straightforward. We've got ominous, the thunder echoed in the sky like, I began to feel. Now, we done vocab at the beginning. We don't really want scared or frightened or terrified or petrified, really, but you can use them, absolutely. You might put intimidated. You might put overwhelmed. Think carefully. Step 4 is as follows, and then I'll show you my answer so far. So this is step 4. We're going to use a fronted adverbial, and you're going to use one of the words in the box, and it has to be at the beginning of the sentence. So aggressively, comma, da 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 da, violently, comma, da 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 da, viciously, comma, da da da, fiercely, comma, da da da, whichever one you want, but it must go at the beginning of the sentence. So far we'll have a one-word sentence, a simile to describe the sound, how that makes us feel, and a sentence beginning with a fronted adverbial. And this is my answer so far. Ominous. The thunder echoed in the sky like a deadly spell, cursing its poor victim. I began to feel powerless. Viciously the clouds changed colour to a dark ebony. So let's just look back. We've got our one-word sentence to begin. We've got our simile to describe the sound. It is not a cliche. We've got a sentence about how we feel, powerless. We've got our fronted adverbial, which is viciously. And what I've described there is how quickly the clouds have changed colour. Ebony is another word for black, so that is something you might want to use in your vocab. Okay, so far we've got quite a good answer. Using structure, because we've got a one-word sentence, and we've used a fronted adverbial, and we've used a simile, and hopefully we've been improving our vocabulary as we go. Right, step 5. We're going to stick with complex sentence here, and this sentence we're going to describe how the clouds move, but you must begin with in the distance, comma. So you might put something like in the distance, comma, the clouds. Okay, so step 5, your sentence has to begin with in the distance, comma. That's your subordinate clause. Your main clause is to follow, and you are describing how the clouds move. Once you've got that, we'll move to step 6. Now we are staying with the clouds because we don't want our answer to dot about, and by that I mean describe a million different things in a million different sentences, because that is not going to be cohesive, which is one of the things mentioned in the assessment objectives. So our next sentence must describe the clouds again, but this time how they part. So we've described how they move. Now we're going to describe how they part. I've got a suggestion on the slide, if you need it. All of a sudden, comma, the clouds. So again, I'm starting with my subordinate clause. So your complex sentence is clear there. And again, it's part of structure, isn't it, to place that at the beginning. All of a sudden, comma, the clouds. We're going to do step 7 and step 8 before I show you my answer so far. So step 7 is as follows. Now we are changing paragraph, and we're thinking about our structure. So we are starting our next paragraph with a rhetorical question. Rhetorical questions are wonderful in terms of structure, because if you place them in the right place, you have the reader thinking. So think about whether or not it is more manipulative or more punchy or more influential for your rhetorical question to be at the beginning of a paragraph, at the end, or perhaps in the middle. So for me, in this section, I'm going to put it at the start of my new paragraph. Now, I've just put 3 suggestions on the slide there. What should I do? Would I escape? Was this the end? You don't have to use them, but again, if you can't think of your own, why not use one of those? We're going to do step 8 before we look at my answer. This is step 8. This time we are going to describe the first sighting of the tornado approaching, and we're going to use a simile. Again, I've put a suggestion on the board there, but if you're trying to really test yourself, go for it. My suggestion is, there it was, a tornado spiralling ferociously like. Look again at the structure of the sentence. Your subordinate clause, a tornado, is segregated by the 2 commas for structural reasons. So when the reader reads it, they pause at the idea that it's a tornado. There it was, a tornado spiraled. So you've got that extra punch and that extra means of scaring the reader, if you like. Now, this is my answer so far. My answer so far then reads like this. Ominous. The thunder echoed in the sky like a deadly spell, cursing its poor victim. I began to feel powerless. Viciously the clouds changed colour to a dark ebony. In the distance, the clouds moved awkwardly as if nervous. All of a sudden they parted and a daunting sight lay ahead. Was this the end? There it was, a tornado spiralling ferociously like a tortured animal waiting for revenge. So as you can see, we've got our vocabulary. We can kind of tick that off as we go. We've got figurative language in the use of our similes. We've got a short sentence for impact in I began to feel powerless. Complex sentences with the fronted adverbial viciously, in the distance, and all of a sudden. Rhetorical question placed at the start of that paragraph, although it would have fit beautifully at the end of the first one as well. And our similes aren't cliches. So we haven't done anything difficult here. I haven't used metaphor because I'm going to do metaphor after this piece of writing. I was just showing you how easy it was to really try and be creative. We don't have to stress ourselves out or kill ourselves in an attempt to be creative. What I'm going to do is just bring up what I would use as step 9 if this is what you're going to do for practice before we move to looking at metaphor. So if you have been practicing this, this is what I would do for your next step. I would independently try and write my next 3 sentences. So you've seen what we've done so far. Why don't you try and independently have a go at writing the next 3 sentences? Obviously it follows the simile that we left with, which was the sighting of the tornado. So you might describe how it approaches, what you hear, what you feel, what you smell, etc., etc. And then try and kind of finish off that second paragraph so that you've had some good practice here as you've been watching this revision video. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on in this video to metaphor. So I hope the beginning of this video was useful in terms of looking at being creative with vocabulary and being creative with similes. And naturally we're going to move to metaphors now. Okay? So very simply then, we will quickly revise what a metaphor is, and then we will look at trying to use creative metaphors. So very simply, a metaphor is like a simile. It compares words in a sentence, but instead of seeing that one thing is like something else, a metaphor actually makes one thing become something else, something very different. A metaphor sometimes uses words like is or are or was, but it never uses the words like, because obviously that's going to be a simile and so is as. So 2 very simple examples there are: the smoke was cotton balls billowing from the chimney, the sun was a furnace. So obviously in those 2 examples we are seeing that the smoke is something else and the sun is something else. So what we've got to do with metaphor as well is that we've got to avoid cliches, much like simile really. So very quickly, just put some examples on here to show you very simply what a metaphor is, and then we'll have a look at perhaps writing a metaphor based on a picture. Very simple example of a metaphor there: the cat's fur was a blanket of warmth. What's being compared there is the cat's fur and a blanket of warmth. You can't really have a blanket of warmth, so therein lies the metaphorical element. Again, just another simple example, nothing over the top. The fireworks were a lantern in the sky. So obviously we're seeing that the fireworks were a lantern in terms of obviously how they light up the sky. So once again, we are trying where we can to avoid cliches. A reminder that this is our image. So we're going to try and think of any metaphors we might use to describe it, to describe anything about that image. You could put something as simple as the road was an endless nightmare leading into destruction. And again, just for extra practice there, why don't you try and write 3 metaphors using the words I've given? So the sun penetrated, the fog enveloped, and horizon and empty. Okay, because naturally fog can't envelope something. The sun doesn't essentially penetrate through things. And a horizon can't be empty. So try and put those 3 sentences, try and make them into metaphors just for this additional practice, so that we know we can do creative simile and creative metaphor without any issue. You might try and add a metaphor to your descriptive writing as well that we started earlier. Okay. It makes sense now to move to personification. And personification is a figure of speech in which a thing, an idea or an animal is given human attributes. Very simple example there. The clouds danced across the sky towards the sunlight. Arguably that is a cliche, but it was just to show you exactly what we meant. Now, again, if we're practicing personification, here's a quick test for you in terms of revision. Why not try and write 3 sentences with the below ideas? The sun scowled, the fog ambled, the ocean begged. All personification, naturally the sun can't scowl, a person does. The fog can't amble, again a person would do that when as a form of walking, and the ocean can't beg. So try those as quick practice, and then what I'm going to do is just bring up some vocabulary again, because this revision video is supposed to be helping us with our creative writing. So your vocabulary is coming up on the next section. At the start of this video, I already gave you a list of words we might want to use, like daunting and intimidating, formidable, ominous, and there's some more. Mystified, perplexed, bewildered, stunned, bemused. All variations of the word confused. Again, if you really want to practice this as revision, why not try and placing them into sentences? So far throughout this video, we should have practiced simile, metaphor, personification, and certainly there should have been slight improvement in our vocabulary, I would hope. What we'll look at next is sentence openings and just some very quick ways of varying our sentences in terms of not having to overthink it. So varying sentences is coming now. So a quick way again of thinking about sentence openings, as we already did at the beginning when we done slow writing and I used viciously, is a fronted adverbial. Fronted adverbial it tends to be majority of the time it can be a word that ends ly. So I've put an example there. Elegantly, the ballerina performed her solo piece. Now, the sentence is the ballerina performed her solo piece. That is why the comma then segregates the fronted adverbial from the rest of the sentence. Okay, so again, quick task there for your revision. Why don't you try and write 2 of your own? I've put there on the slide to avoid quickly and slowly. You don't always have to avoid those words. You know, that those words are fine. But again, if we're just trying to practice vocabulary here as well, try and really test yourself. So I've given you elegantly there, but there's going to be many more. If you're really struggling, why not use one of the words I've placed on the board there? So you've got happily, emotionally, gracefully, sternly, coolly, sharply, urgently, apologetically, bitterly, eagerly, hesitantly, calmly, steadily, abruptly, impressively, lightly, heavily, rudely, aggressively. Massive choice of fronted adverbials. Again, try and place 2 at the beginning of a sentence. Emotionally, comma, the old woman approached the graveyard. Apologetically, etc., etc. Okay, so try and have a quick practice there. The next one is slightly trickier in my opinion. Now try and start a sentence with an adjective that ends ed. So I'll give you an example. Horrified by the sight of the graveyard, comma, James found another way home. We have to check that this makes sense. You've got to check very carefully where you place your comma. Remember, the comma should segregate here your subordinate clause, so the information that is added on from the main clause. The main clause is the sentence that makes sense. In this instance, James found another way home is the main clause. And the added on information, the subordinate clause, is horrified by the sight of the graveyard, which is why the comma segregates the 2. So we're going to try and write 2 sentences that begin with an adjective that ends ad. I'm going to bring up some examples again if you are struggling. So I have put scared here, but you know, try not to overuse that one. So you've got scared, tired, exhausted, surprised, excited, amused, confused, perplexed, bewildered, annoyed, frustrated, and distressed. So again, if you put it at the beginning, please be careful where your comma is. So perplexed at the maths question, comma, John decided to cry. So your comma goes before John. Perplexed at the maths question, comma, John decided to cry, because your main sentence, your main clause is John decided to cry. Okay, or annoyed that his tea was not cooked, comma, John screamed at his mother. Again, the comma there goes before John to segregate the subordinate clause from your main clause. So again, just test yourself out there. Try and put two of those words at the beginning of a sentence. And we'll move on to our next sentence opening. And remember, these are just quick ways of trying to vary sentences because we know that one of our assessment objectives is sentence structure. So your next one is an ing word. So a word that ends ing. Please, again, check that it makes sense. So there's your example. Driving down 2nd Street, comma, I saw smoke coming out of a warehouse. Again, you're going to try and write two of your own. I shall bring up some very simple examples here. I don't think this one should be too difficult, but you do need to make sure, as I've said, that you check where your comma is being placed. You've got discussing, playing, bleeding, thinking, contemplating, considering, announcing, smiling, running, and there's hundreds more. Obviously, I've just given you a few there. Key thing is to check your comma. So I don't know, you might put bleeding from his ankle, comma, John realised he had been shot. Again, comma's going to go before John and after ankle. Contemplating his future, comma, John decided to go for advice. Again, so you've just got to think carefully about, is the comma separating the subordinate clause from the main clause? Again, try and write two of these sentences. Dead straightforward. And we will move to our next one. Our next one's dead simple, so I think we've got the more tricky ones out of the way. And your next one is a time connective. So time connective is probably one of the easiest. So you've got quite a few examples which I'll bring up, but my example here is after the car accident, comma, the pedestrians were worried about that particular road. Again, your comma's in the right place and your time connectives at the beginning, the word after. Try and again write two of your own. I shall bring up some choices now just to make it a little bit easier in terms of revision. So before, during, after, at midnight, today, tomorrow. Dead straightforward, time connectives. We're going to move now to preposition. So your preposition then is the position of something. Your example at the top, in the middle of the chocolate cake, comma, there lay a diamond ring. I've given you some examples again if you want to try and write a couple of your own. On the table, comma, underneath the chair, comma, at the top of the stairs, comma, beyond the trees, comma, behind the shed, comma. Dead straightforward, nothing over the top. So beyond the trees, comma, there lay a mysterious shed. I don't know. At the top of the stairs, comma, she knew she had left the gun. Dead straightforward. So preposition is the position that something might be in or be placed in. Again, try and test yourself and use one or two. I've only got two more sentences left to show you, and then we'll move on. So, a who clause. So a who clause we might put in the middle of a sentence and it will relate to people more often than not. So more often than not, the who clause will relate to people. Example, Michael, comma, who found the dead body, comma, was anxious about who to tell. Look at the yellow box. When you remove the who clause, the sentence should still make sense. Michael was anxious about who to tell. If you remove that clause and you don't have a sentence that makes sense, then it's not correct. The easiest way to do this, I feel, is to use a person's name at the beginning. The Prime Minister, comma, who was extremely nervous about his speech, comma, was sweating profusely. Take out the middle. The Prime Minister was sweating profusely. See, again, if you can attempt to write two of your own here. And as I say, the trick is that when you take out the middle bit, you will still have a sentence. And then the which clause. And the which clause is in the middle again, similar to the who clause, but obviously it's not going to refer to a person. because you don't say Michael, which da-da-da. So your example is the lorry, comma, which veered out of control, comma, was responsible for killing 3 people. And once again, when you remove the which clause, we should still have a sentence. The lorry was responsible for killing 3 people. Okay, so your who and your which clauses then are the same. It's just that one naturally does not refer to people, which is which. Okay, so the skyscraper, comma, which was demolished, comma, left a hole in the centre of the city. Take out the middle, the skyscraper left a hole in the centre of the city. Okay, I've said quite a lot there. Sentences then, what I'm showing you is that we need not overthink it. It can be quite simple actually. We can vary our sentences without stressing, without worrying. If you are using this video as a part of revision in terms of actually writing as you go, I'll bring up a quick task. If not, then naturally you can just avoid the task. So why not try and use the tornado image that we've been writing about all this time, but use sentence beginnings? So why not try and do an L-Y-I-N-G-E-D sentences that start like that? Why not try a time connective, a who clause and a which clause? So you undoubtedly know that you have varied your sentences and that you have used a range of complex sentences that begin in different ways. I hope so far this video has been useful. I've said quite a lot, so I'm going to do a separate video on structure. So please make sure you check that out. On structure, I'm going to look at reading and writing as well. So it's kind of 2 birds, 1 stone. Just to finish off, what I'm going to do is bring up a couple of images. Just again, if you are attempting to practice descriptive writing. Now remember that for a successful piece of writing, try to vary your sentence openings where possible. We've been over quite a few. Think about improving your vocabulary if you can. Your similes, metaphors and personification should where possible be very, very creative and original, and if you can, avoid the cliches and the overused ones. And the thing I'll say on structure here is that think very carefully about how you begin and end your paragraphs, and if that is the maximum impact you can have on your reader. So just for if you're going to do some writing, I'll bring up these images. Remember this video we looked at slow writing? And slow writing is very wonderful in the sense that you consciously think about exactly what you're going to place where. So we started with a 1-word sentence. You might start with a simile. You might start with a simple sentence or a rhetorical question. So really think about, am I influencing the reader's response here as well? So there's an image that you might want to practice describing, which is a tsunami. Again, you're thinking about the 5 sentences, the similes, the metaphors that you might be able to incorporate. Or what about attempting to describe perhaps an earthquake? I hope this video has been useful in terms of looking at describing the image that you're going to be provided with on paper 1, section B. Please pause the video or go back and have a look at slow writing and practice similes and metaphors and sentence openings. If you need any more of my videos, just type my name into YouTube, which is Stacey Reay, Stacey, and Reay is Reay. And good luck in your AQA English language exam.